"Daddy, is it bad news?" The question came from somewhere around his hip, where Nina's hand was wrapped around two of his fingers, the way it always was when she sensed something wrong. She was 6 years old, and already fluent in the language of things her father wasn't ready to say. Damon Carter stood in the hallway of his apartment building at 6:47 in the morning, staring at the white envelope taped to his door. The tape had been torn rather than cut. Someone had done this in a hurry, or someone hadn't cared enough to do it right. Either way, he already knew what it said. The hallway smelled like last night's cooking from 3 different apartments. Onions, something fried, the particular staleness of buildings that breathe through their walls instead of windows. The light coming through the window at the end of the corridor was gray and thin, the kind of Chicago light that promises nothing and delivers less. "It's just paper," he said. "Come on, you're going to be late for school." He pulled the notice free, folded it once without looking at the number, tucked it into the back pocket of his work pants. $2,800, 14 days, numbers he didn't have, a timeline he couldn't meet. Nina didn't believe him. He could see it in the way her gray eyes studied his face for the information he wasn't giving her. But she didn't push. She'd learned that too, when to ask and when to wait, when to try again later. They walked down the 3 flights of stairs because the elevator had been broken since March. Nina held the railing with one hand and his fingers with the other, and she talked about how the fish in the aquarium at school had died yesterday. All of them. The teacher said sometimes things end, but that doesn't mean they weren't good while they lasted. Damon recognized what she was really talking about. The divorce, her mother leaving, the way their life kept rearranging itself into shapes that didn't quite fit anymore. "That's a smart thing your teacher said he told her." "I know. I think she was sad, though. She had the sad eyes." Sometimes people can be sad and smart at the same time. Nina thought about this as they reached the bottom of the stairs. "Like you." He stopped. Looked down at her. "Like me sometimes," he said. "Yeah." She nodded, satisfied. Then she asked, "Can we get waffles this weekend?" And he said maybe, and she said, "Maybe usually means no, but I understand." And he felt something crack in his chest that he couldn't afford to let show. The bus stop was 2 blocks away. He walked her there, checked her backpack zipper, smoothed down a piece of her hair that had escaped her ponytail. The stubborn piece that always escaped, no matter how carefully he braided it the night before. He kissed the top of her head. "Have a good day, sweetheart." "You too, Daddy." He stood on the sidewalk until the yellow doors closed with her inside and the bus pulled away down the street. And then he was alone, with the eviction notice in his pocket, and the math he'd already done 100 times. He drove to the job site. The hotel was the kind of place that had a name people recognized, the kind with a lobby that smelled like money and fresh flowers, and the particular confidence of spaces designed for people who never worried about the cost of things. Damon parked in the service garage, walked through the service entrance, took the service elevator to the penthouse level, and he spent the next 8 hours underneath the electrical panel, running wire through conduit, while guests walked overhead in shoes that cost more than his rent. He was good at this. That was the thing people didn't understand about him, or didn't care to understand. 12 years in the trade, a reputation for precision, contractors who called him by name and paid him on time and recommended him to other contractors. Around noon, a younger apprentice named Jerome asked him about a junction box configuration, and Damon walked him through it step by step, patient, thorough. The kid was nervous. First week on a job this size, Damon remembered that feeling. "You're doing fine," he told Jerome. "Just slow down. The wire doesn't care if you're fast. It cares if you're right." Jerome nodded. "Thanks, Mr. Carter." Damon went back to his panel. He thought about Nina at school, probably eating lunch, right now, probably sitting with that girl she'd mentioned last week, the one who also liked the cartoon with the talking animals. He thought about the notice in his pocket and the number on it, and all the numbers that didn't add up no matter how many times he rearranged them. His phone buzzed at 3:47. 3 missed calls from his attorney. 1 voicemail. He listened to it sitting in his truck in the parking garage. Engine off, windows up. The particular silence of a man receiving news he couldn't afford to hear. The custody hearing had been moved up. 6 weeks. The Prescott family. His ex-wife's parents. They'd filed a motion. They were arguing that Damon's current financial situation made him an unfit guardian. They had documentation, pay stubs, rental records, the kind of paper trail that tells a story about a man, whether it's the true story or not. Their attorney had used the word unstable. Damon sat with that word for a long time, turned it over in his mind the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. Unstable. As if loving your daughter and working 60 hours a week and doing everything right still wasn't enough. As if the measure of a father was the number in his bank account and not the number of times he'd sat outside her bedroom door when she couldn't sleep. Not the way he knew exactly which sandwich she liked, which nightlight she needed, which song made her laugh when nothing else could. Unstable. He thought about Nina on the bus that morning, her hand around his fingers. The way she'd said "you too, Daddy," like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like he would always be there to say it to. He sat in the truck for 11 minutes. The parking garage was emptying around him. Other workers heading home to other lives. A woman in a suit walked past his window without seeing him. A security guard glanced over once, then looked away. He was invisible here. Part of the infrastructure. Something that kept buildings running and didn't get invited inside them. And then everything changed. He didn't know who she was at first. He saw the crowd first. Cameras. Microphones. Voices shouting over each other in the particular rhythm of people paid to ask questions that didn't want answering. They'd cornered someone against the elevator bank near the east exit. A tight knot of bodies and equipment, and the sharp artificial light of video recording. In the center of it, a woman. She was moving the way people move when they're trying not to show they're afraid. Controlled steps, chin level, eyes fixed on the exit she couldn't reach. She was pregnant maybe 5 or 6 months along, and she was surrounded by dozens of people and completely alone in a way that had nothing to do with numbers. Damon didn't think about it. He got out of the truck. What happened next took less than 4 minutes. He walked into the crowd without running, without pushing, without raising his voice. He positioned himself between her and the nearest camera, his shoulder blocking the lens, his body creating a gap in the wall that had formed around her. He looked at the nearest reporter, a man with a microphone and an expensive haircut, and he said, "She's not doing questions right now." His voice came from somewhere lower than his chest, somewhere that didn't leave room for negotiation. The reporter hesitated. Damon didn't move. He stood exactly where he was, exactly as tall as he was, and he waited. The crowd recalculated. He put his hand on the small of her back. Not because he intended to, but because she needed steering, and the exit was behind him. They moved together through the gap he'd created. 6 seconds of her body close to his, the particular warmth of another person's presence. And then they were through, and the door was closing, and the noise dropped away like something severed. They stood in the service corridor. Concrete floors, fluorescent lights, the distant hum of machinery. She was breathing faster than she should be. Her hands were pressed flat against her stomach, one on top of the other, protective without thinking about it. She looked at him, not the way people usually looked at him, not with the quick dismissal of someone cataloging his appearance and filing it under not relevant. She looked at him like she was calculating something, running a formula he wasn't part of. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady. Everything about her was steady except her breathing. He nodded, turned to leave. "Wait," she said. He stopped. She studied him for a long moment. The fluorescent light was harsh and unkind, showing the shadows under her eyes, the careful architecture of her expression, the way she held her shoulders exactly level, because that was what control looked like when you were always being watched. "I have a proposition for you," she said. "And before you say no, I need you to hear the number first." That was the day Damon Carter's life divided into before and after. He said no 3 times. He signed on the 4th. If you're the kind of person who stays for stories about people who do the hard thing, even when the hard thing costs them everything, stay with this one. It only gets deeper from here. Her name was Genevieve Hartwell, and she hadn't slept more than 4 hours in a row since the morning she looked at the test and understood that everything was about to get complicated. She was 31 years old. She'd been running Hartwell Industries for 4 years since her father's stroke left him in a facility on the north side of the city, unable to speak, unable to recognize her on the days when the light in his eyes went somewhere she couldn't follow. The board had turned to her after his collapse with the particular expression men use when they expect to be disappointed by a woman in a position she didn't earn. She had not disappointed them. She had also not forgiven them for the expression. The company was stable. By most measures, it was thriving. But the board wasn't the only thing watching her. There was a man named Sebastian Crane who had been watching for 2 years, a minority shareholder with a seat on the investment committee and a reputation for restructuring companies by removing the people who built them. Genevieve had blocked his takeover proposal by 3 votes. She'd called in every favor she'd accumulated in 4 years of 16-hour days. She had won that battle the way she won most battles, by being more prepared than anyone expected and more ruthless than anyone wanted to believe. Sebastian had smiled at her across the conference table and said he respected her position. She had known then that he wasn't finished. She was 10 weeks pregnant when she found out that he knew. She didn't know how. A leak from her doctor's office, a paid informant in her life. It didn't matter. What mattered was what he intended to do with the information. His attorney's letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. He was filing for paternity recognition. The relationship had been a mistake. 3 weeks born from exhaustion and loneliness, and the vulnerability that arrives when you've just survived something that should have broken you. She'd ended it before she knew about the pregnancy. She'd thought that was the end. But nothing was ever the end with men like Sebastian Crane. Under the terms of her grandfather's original trust, any blood heir of the Hartwell founding family had a claim to proportional equity. A child with Sebastian listed as legal father would give him exactly the lever he needed. Custody arrangements would require negotiation. Negotiation would require access. Access would give him everything he'd been trying to take. He didn't want the child. He wanted the weapon the child could become. Her attorneys had offered her one path forward. A legal husband, established on record before Sebastian filed, would make his paternity claim significantly harder to pursue. It wouldn't stop him, but it would slow him down. And time was the one thing she still had more of than he did. She needed a husband, someone who wasn't connected to her world, not susceptible to Sebastian's money, not interested in anything she had except what she was willing to put in writing. She had not expected to find one in a hotel parking garage, but there he had been, a man in work clothes who had walked into a crowd of strangers to help someone he didn't know, without calculation, without hesitation, without any apparent concern for what it might cost him. She'd run his name that night. Damon Carter, 34 years old, licensed electrician with 12 years in the trade, one daughter age 6, divorced 3 years. Currently the subject of a custody dispute filed by his former in-laws. He needed money. She needed a signature. The mathematics were simple. The execution was not. He came to her office 2 days after the parking garage, the 47th floor of a building that looked down on the hotel where he had been working. He stood in her doorway in clean clothes that were not new, and he looked at her space the way people look at spaces they know they don't belong in, taking it in, setting it aside. She did not offer him a seat immediately. She watched him instead, the way he held himself, the way his eyes moved across the room cataloging exits, noting distances, the stillness in a man who knew how to wait. "I'll be direct," she said. "I don't have time for anything else." "Go ahead." She laid out the terms without softening them. Contract marriage, 12 months minimum. He would appear at functions, meet her attorneys live in her home, sign an NDA, conduct himself in a manner consistent with the image they were building. In exchange, he would receive enough money to stabilize his housing, retire his debt, and retain a legal team that could actually compete in a custody case. She named the number. It was more than he'd made in 5 years combined. Damon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're pregnant." "Yes." "Whose is it?" "That's not part of the terms." He looked at her steadily. "You want me to pretend to be your husband, move into your house, and I don't get to know whose child I'd be covering for." "You'd be covering for nothing," she said. "The child is mine. The arrangement is a legal formality that benefits both of us. It benefits you. And you. Considerably." He stood up. "I appreciate your time. Mr. Carter." He stopped at the door. "I'm not asking you to love me," she said. "I'm asking you to honor a contract. You do that every day. This is not different in any way that should matter to you." He left without responding. That evening, he sat in his truck outside Nina's school, watching the other parents file out with their children. Families that looked like families. Fathers who could afford the houses they lived in. Mothers who hadn't left for other cities and stopped calling. He thought about the number Genevieve Hartwell had named. He thought about the number on the eviction notice. He thought about the hearing in 6 weeks and the attorney he couldn't afford and the Prescott's lawyers using words like unstable and environment and best interest of the child. He said no. He said no again the next morning when his attorney told him the Prescotts had retained additional counsel, a specialist, someone whose hourly rate was more than Damon made in a day. He said no 2 days later, standing in his kitchen at 2 a.m, looking at the photograph on the refrigerator. Nina at the beach last summer, squinting into the sun, her smile so wide it pushed her cheeks up and crinkled her eyes. He did the math for the 4th time. He arrived at the same answer. He picked up the phone. Thursday afternoon, same office, same desk. Genevieve slid the contract across to him without ceremony. 14 pages of language that reduced his life to terms and conditions. He read every page while she waited in silence. When he finished, he initialed each section, signed the last page, and pushed it back across the desk. "When do we start?" "You move in Saturday," Genevieve said. "Nina as well, if that's your preference. There's a room prepared." He looked up at her. "You planned for her." "Of course," she said, like it was obvious. "She's part of your life. The arrangement only works if it's coherent." He nodded slowly. Something in him loosened that he hadn't expected to loosen. She'd thought about his daughter before he asked. Somewhere in the architecture of this arrangement was a consideration that had nothing to do with contracts. He told himself it was just logistics, just a business transaction, just the math working out the only way it could. He didn't tell Nina it was temporary. He told her they were going to stay with a friend for a while, a big house with a yard and a fish tank. She could bring whatever she wanted as long as it fit in the 2 bags he'd packed. Nina asked if the fish were friendly. He said he'd find out. Saturday morning, they loaded his truck. The apartment looked smaller, empty than it ever had full. He stood in the doorway of Nina's room, her backpack on, her elephant under her arm, looking at the walls where her drawings had been. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah. Are we coming back?" He crouched down to her level, put his hands on her shoulders, looked her in the eyes, those gray eyes that saw everything and forgave everything, and still believed in him, despite all the evidence that believing in him was unreasonable. "We're going somewhere better," he said. "Okay." She thought about it with the seriousness she brought to most questions. Then she nodded. "Okay." She took his hand. They walked out. He pulled the door closed without looking back. What neither of them knew driving away from that building was that Genevieve hadn't told him everything. The contract was accurate. Every dollar, every clause, every expectation. But the reason behind it was not a legal formality. It was a war. And Damon Carter had just agreed to walk into the middle of it without a map. The house was not a home. It was a statement. 11 rooms, 4 of which Genevieve used regularly. A staff of 3 who moved through the space with the trained silence of people paid not to exist. Everything was clean and expensive and placed with intention. The kind of space that looked like it had never been lived in because living would have disturbed the arrangement. Nina stood in the foyer with her elephant and her backpack and looked up at the chandelier like she was counting the crystals. "It's really big," she said. "It's just a house," Damon said. "Houses come in different sizes." She thought about that. Then she said, "Can I see my room?" Her room had been prepared with the thoroughness of someone who had researched children without knowing any. The bed was correct. The dresser was correct. The lamp on the nightstand was soft and warm and probably cost more than Damon's truck payment. But there were no books she recognized. No pictures on the walls. One stuffed bear purchased new, the tag still attached, sitting on the pillow like a display item in a store window. Nina set it on the shelf facing the wall. She arranged her own things around it without comment. Her elephant on the bed, her crayons on the desk, her shoes lined up by the closet door the way Damon had taught her. She was 6 years old and already understood diplomacy. Damon learned the rhythms of the house over the first week. Coffee appeared at 6:30 whether anyone wanted it. The housekeeper, a woman named Rosa, would collect laundry from hampers but not from floors. The thermostat was set to 68 degrees year-round, which was 4 degrees colder than Damon could sleep comfortably. He adjusted it the first night. By morning, it had been reset. He didn't adjust it again. Genevieve existed on a schedule that didn't intersect with his except at planned intervals. Breakfast at 7 when she reviewed the day's agenda while he helped Nina with her cereal. A brief check-in at 6 p.m. Then she retreated to her office and the door closed and the house went silent. Every night that first week, Damon sat on the edge of Nina's bed after lights out. She was past being read to, she'd informed him. She read to herself now. But he sat with her anyway, his hand on her back, feeling the rise and fall of her breathing as it slowed toward sleep. "Do you like it here?" she asked one night, her voice blurred at the edges by tiredness. "It's fine. Do you miss our apartment?" He thought about the question. The hallway that smelled like other people's cooking, the elevator that never worked, the water stain on the ceiling above his bed that he'd told her was a map to a secret island. Sometimes he said, "Me too. But the fish tank is really nice." "It is," he agreed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Daddy." "Yeah. Are we going to be okay?" He looked down at her. Her eyes were half closed, but she was still watching him, still waiting, still believing that whatever answer he gave would be true because he was her father and fathers told the truth. "Yeah," he said, "we're going to be okay." She nodded once. Her eyes closed. Her breathing deepened. He sat there for another 5 minutes, watching her sleep in a room that wasn't hers, in a house that belonged to a woman he didn't know. And he wondered what he had done. The first public test came on the third day, a dinner hosted by a board member named Garrett, a man who wore a watch worth more than Damon's truck, and spoke to Genevieve for the first 20 minutes as if Damon were furniture. The room was full of people who dressed like Genevieve and talked like Genevieve and looked at Damon with the particular expression of people trying to figure out why he was there. Some of them smiled. Some of them didn't bother pretending. When Garrett finally addressed him directly, it was with slow, deliberate enunciation, the voice people use when they are not sure the other person speaks English. "And what is it you do, Marcus?" He got the name wrong. Damon knew it wasn't an accident. "Electrical," Damon said. "Commercial and industrial." "Ah." Garrett nodded slowly, the way you nod at something mildly interesting and fundamentally unimportant. "Hands-on work." "Yes," Damon said. "The kind where things actually work when you're done." Genevieve beside him didn't react, but Damon saw the slight adjustment at the corner of her mouth. Something that might have been approval if she'd been the kind of person who showed approval. Later, a woman from the board pulled Genevieve aside. Damon wasn't meant to hear the conversation, but he was standing close enough. The woman spoke in the low voice of someone sharing a confidence that wasn't really a confidence. "Are you sure this is the image you want to project right now?" "The optics are. I mean, it's not that anyone objects. It's just that the timing is unusual, don't you think?" Genevieve's response was flat and final. "I'll take that under advisement." She didn't look at Damon for the rest of the dinner. He understood she was managing the room. Looking at him would have made the conversation about something other than her control of it. He understood it strategically. It still landed like a door closing. On the drive home, she said, "You handled Garrett well." "I didn't handle him," Damon said. "I just talked to him like a person." She looked out the window at the city passing by. That's what handling him looks like. The internet had opinions. One side called it romantic. The billionaire and the electrician. The underdog love story the world had apparently been waiting for. Profile after profile reposted the photo from the parking garage, his hand on her back, her face turned toward him, captions written by strangers who didn't know either of them. The other side was uglier. Damon had learned to recognize its particular grammar. Comments that never said anything explicit. That framed everything as concern. That arrived at their destination through the architecture of questions. Is she really serious? What does he bring to the table? Seems like an interesting choice for someone in her position. He stopped reading on the fourth day. He'd learned this skill before. The news cycle about a black man in an unusual situation always resolved the same way eventually. The best thing he could do was be unavailable for it. What he couldn't be unavailable for was Nina. She'd started at a new school closer to Genevieve's house. Different children, different teachers, different rhythms. She'd made one friend, a girl named Cora, who liked the same cartoon animals. She reported that her teacher was okay, but talked too loud. She was adjusting. Children adjust, that's what everyone always said. But Damon watched her at dinner, quiet in ways she wasn't usually quiet, and he recognized what he was seeing. The careful silence of someone doing the work of belonging somewhere that didn't feel like theirs yet. He knew the feeling. 3 weeks into the arrangement, everything shifted. Damon had a late job. Emergency rewiring at a restaurant downtown that couldn't wait until morning. He arranged for Rosa to stay with Nina until he returned. He got back at 9:30. Rosa met him at the door. Her expression was the careful neutral of someone who had handled something and wasn't sure if she'd handled it correctly. She woke up crying around 8 o'clock, Rosa said quietly. Ms. Hartwell sent me home. Said she would handle it. Damon looked toward the stairs. He looked back at Rosa. She offered nothing else. He went upstairs. Nina's door was open 3 inches, enough for light to fall in a thin strip across the hallway floor. He stopped outside it, listened. No crying, no voices, just the quality of silence that exists when 2 people have been talking about something important and have finished. He pushed the door open, and he wasn't ready for what he saw. Genevieve Hartwell was sitting on the floor, not in the chair by the window, not on the edge of the bed, on the floor, her back against Nina's mattress, her legs extended in front of her, her hands flat on the carpet on either side of her hips. She was 6 months pregnant and sitting on the floor of a child's bedroom, and she was looking at the wall. Nina was sitting cross-legged on the bed above her. Their heads were at almost the same level. They were both looking at the same spot on the wall, the way people look at things when they've been discussing something easier to discuss without eye contact. She asked me if I was scared, Genevieve said. She didn't turn around. She'd known he was there. Of course she had. Are you, Damon asked. A long pause. Long enough to be honest. She asked first. What did you tell her? Oh. Genevieve's hands pressed slightly against the carpet. The movement of someone choosing words carefully. I told her I didn't know how to answer that. She said that was okay. That her dad says he doesn't know things, and then he figures them out. Damon looked at Nina. She was watching him with the expression of someone managing 2 adults at once. An expression she had no business knowing at 6 years old. An expression she'd learned anyway. She stayed, Nina said. Not explanation, statement. The thing that mattered. I see that, Damon said. He met Genevieve's eyes across the room. And there it was. The unguarded thing. The expression that existed before she had time to arrange it. He'd seen it once before in the parking garage in the seconds before she collected herself. This time she didn't collect herself. She was afraid. Not strategically, not usefully. Just afraid the way anyone is afraid when they're in the middle of something they don't know how to do and someone small has asked them the right question. He didn't say anything about it. He put Nina back to bed, smoothed her hair. She said she's not as scary as she looks. And he said, I know, and she said, okay, and closed her eyes with the efficiency of a child who has decided the adults have this handled. When he came back into the hallway, Genevieve's door was already closed. But something had shifted. He felt it the way you feel a change in weather. Not visible yet, but already in the air. He found the name by accident. Genevieve left her laptop open on the kitchen counter one morning. Unusual. The first lapse he'd seen in 6 weeks. Damon wasn't looking at it. He was pouring coffee. But he was close enough to see the email header before the screen locked. Sebastian Crane. He remembered the name. He'd seen it weeks ago on a financial news site in an article about Hartwell Industries. A photograph of a man in his 50s with silver hair and the expression of someone who believed rooms arranged themselves for his benefit. That evening, after Nina was in bed, Damon looked him up. Sebastian Crane, 54 years old. Minority shareholder in Hartwell Industries with a seat on the investment committee. His name connected to 3 corporate takeovers in the past decade, all successful in removing existing leadership. And according to a recent legal filing, petitioning for paternity recognition of an unborn child. The filing didn't name Genevieve. It didn't have to. Damon sat in the dark kitchen with this information. The clock ticked somewhere in the house. Outside a car passed. Headlights sliding across the wall and then gone. He got up, walked to Genevieve's office, knocked. She looked up from her desk. Read his face. Sit down. Just tell me. All of it. She didn't reach for the contract. Didn't invoke any clause. She set her pen down and looked at him with the expression of someone who'd been carrying something heavy for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like not to. "I met Sebastian at a conference 2 years ago," she said. "I'd just come through a difficult board vote. I was not at my best. The relationship was brief and a mistake. I ended it. When I found out I was pregnant, I waited too long to decide what to do. By the time I decided, he already knew. How? I don't know. I stopped trying to figure that out." She paused. Her hand moved to her stomach, protective without thinking. "His plan is straightforward. If he's recognized as the legal father, before I can establish another arrangement, he gets leverage over custody. Custody leverage becomes boardroom leverage. He doesn't want the child. He wants the access the child gives him. And the contract," Damon said, "the husband on paper, that blocks him. It complicates his filing. Not permanently, but long enough for my attorneys to build a case." Damon was quiet. "You used me," he said, "as a legal instrument, without telling me what the instrument was for. I paid you." "Don't." She stopped. "I moved my daughter into your house." He kept his voice level, but just barely. "You knew there was a man out there dangerous enough to threaten a billion-dollar company. You put Nina in the same building as whatever he's capable of. And you called it a logistical formality." Genevieve opened her mouth, closed it. "Was any of it a lie?" he asked. "The contract. Any of it?" "No. Every term is exactly as written. Just not why." "Just not why." He stood up, walked to the door. "I need to think." He thought for 11 days. He was still there, still present at the functions that required him, still sitting across the breakfast table, pouring Nina's juice, asking about her homework, performing the rituals of domestic life that had become surprisingly easy to perform. But the warmth that had been quietly building between him and Genevieve, the thing neither of them had named because naming it would have meant acknowledging it, went cold. She felt it. The small things he used to do, remembering she couldn't drink coffee that had sat too long, standing slightly closer to her in rooms full of people who made her feel like a position instead of a person. The way his presence in a room had made the room feel different. She hadn't realized how much she relied on those things until they disappeared. Even Nina noticed. "Daddy," she said one night, "why does Genevieve seem sad? Can you fix it? You're good at fixing things." He didn't know how to answer that. Then Sebastian moved. He'd found something, or someone had found it for him. A minor charge from when Damon was 19, disorderly conduct, expunged but recoverable by someone with resources. It was nothing, legally irrelevant. But it was fed to 2 tabloids and a legal commentator who used it to construct a narrative about the man Genevieve Hartwell had married. The Prescott family's attorney issued a statement the same afternoon, referencing the reports, requesting that the court review the stability of Damon's current living situation. Damon read the statement in his truck outside Nina's school. He called his attorney. She told him it was a nuisance filing, but would require a response. The timeline was tightening. He sat in the truck for a long time after the call ended, watched the other parents arrive. The minivans and SUVs and comfortable certainty of people who had never had to worry about someone examining their lives for evidence of instability. He understood now. Sebastian Crane had Damon's name on a marriage certificate. Dismantling Damon was easier than dismantling Genevieve directly. He had put himself in this. He had put Nina in this. That night, he found Genevieve in the kitchen. She was standing by the window, looking out at the backyard, her hand on her stomach. "I need you to understand what just happened," he said. "That filing, the one your opponent handed to the Prescotts, that could cost me my daughter. I know. I've already asked my attorneys to. I don't want your attorneys. I want you to understand that this is real. This isn't a boardroom complication. This is Nina. I understand that. Do you?" He looked at her directly. "Because I signed a contract that said this was a business arrangement. I did not sign up to be a target. And I certainly did not sign up for Nina to be one." Genevieve held his gaze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I know," she said quietly. "Then you know why I can't stay." The next morning, Damon went to Genevieve's attorney's office. He left an envelope at the front desk. Inside was a formal request for early contract termination, citing material omission of relevant risk at the time of signing. His own attorney had drafted it, clean and precise. He didn't go upstairs. He left the envelope and walked back out onto the street and sat in his truck for 11 minutes before he could make himself drive. Genevieve received the envelope at 10:15. She read it alone at her desk with the door closed. She'd run every contingency, mapped every threat, built a strategy around a marriage that was supposed to be a controlled variable. Damon Carter had not behaved like a controlled variable, and now he was gone. And the envelope on her desk was the cleanest evidence she had ever received that she had handled something badly. Not the strategy, the person. She put the envelope in her drawer, sat at her desk for the rest of the afternoon with her hand on her stomach, feeling the baby move. For the first time, she understood. She'd been so focused on not losing that she'd forgotten what she was fighting to protect. Not the company. Not the equity. The child. And whatever fragile chance existed that this child would grow up in something that felt like safety. She picked up her phone, set it down, picked it up again. She didn't call her attorney. She called Damon. He didn't answer. She didn't leave a message. There was nothing she could say in a message that would be worth saying. But she called. That was new. For 11 days, Damon lived in his old apartment. The eviction had been handled. Genevieve's team had negotiated a settlement one term that still applied even after he walked away. The landlord had been paid. The notice had been rescinded. The apartment felt different now. Smaller. Emptier. The walls where Nina's drawings had hung still showed the marks from the tape. Nina was confused. She asked where Genevieve was. She asked about the baby. She asked if they were going back or if this was their house now. He told her they were figuring things out. That grown-ups had to figure things out sometimes. That whatever happened, he'd make sure she was okay. One night Nina said, "Daddy, yeah, are you figuring things out too?" "Yeah, I'm trying." She nodded. Then she said, "I hope you figure out the right thing." Because Genevieve was nice. And the baby is going to need people. How do you know the baby needs people? Because babies are really small, Nina said, with the patience of someone explaining something obvious. They can't do anything by themselves. They need people to help them. Like me when I was a baby. You helped me. I did. So someone has to help Genevieve's baby. And if we don't live there anymore, who's going to help? Damon looked at his daughter, 6 years old, already understanding something about responsibility that he'd been trying not to see. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe you should figure that out," Nina said. Then she went back to her coloring book, satisfied with her contribution. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. On the 10th day, Sebastian filed his amended petition. By the next morning, it was on 3 financial news sites and 1 national outlet. The piece was careful and legal. It noted that Genevieve's husband had requested early termination of a prenuptial agreement. Noted that the timeline coincided with the paternity filing. Didn't connect the dots. Just arranged them. The board called an emergency session for Thursday. Genevieve's attorney delivered the damage. Without a stable marital arrangement on record, her legal barrier argument would become evidence of fraud in court. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Time. You have until Thursday." She sat in her kitchen. Nina's drawings were still on the refrigerator. Rosa had kept them. 3 crayon horses that Nina had presented with the authority of an artist sharing important work. Genevieve hadn't moved them. She looked at them for a long time. Then she picked up her car keys. Damon was in the driveway of his rental when her car pulled up. He watched her get out, 7 months pregnant, moving carefully, no jacket, no prepared expression. For the first time since he'd known her, she looked like someone who had stopped performing. "You didn't answer," she said. "I know. I'm not here about the contract." "Then why are you here?" She was quiet for a moment. Not the calculating quiet he'd learned to read. Something raw. The quiet of someone choosing words because they matter, not because they position. "Because I don't know how to do this alone," she said. "And I've been doing everything alone for so long. I didn't notice it wasn't working until you left, and I could feel the difference." He waited. "I should have told you about Sebastian from the beginning. I should have told you everything. I didn't, because I've learned that the more people know, the more leverage they have. I've operated from that assumption so long that I applied it to you without thinking." She paused. "That was wrong. Not strategically wrong. Just wrong. Genevieve, I'm not finished. I need to say this before I lose my nerve, and I don't lose my nerve, so that's not a phrase I expected to use." She took a breath. "I chose you because of what I saw in that parking garage, not because you were available or convenient. Because you walked into a crowd of strangers to help someone you didn't know, without calculating whether it would benefit you. I haven't met many people who operate that way. I wasn't sure they existed. Her voice cracked slightly. She kept going. I identified that quality in you, and I used it. I'm sorry. Damon was quiet for a long moment. A car passed on the street. A dog barked somewhere down the block. If I come back, he said finally, it's not under the same terms. I know. I meant what I said about Nina. She doesn't get caught in this. I know. I'm going to fix that. How? I'm going to tell the truth. In court. On record. Everything about Sebastian. About the arrangement. About what he's been doing and why. It exposes me. But it removes his leverage over you and Nina. She looked at him steadily. It means the marriage contract becomes public. Everything becomes public. I wanted to avoid that. What changed? She glanced toward the window, the direction of crayon horses 11 miles away. Nina asked me if I was scared, and I didn't answer. I've been thinking about that for 11 days, about what it means that a 6-year-old asked the right question and I had no answer. She met his eyes. I don't want to raise a child who learns that the answer to fear is silence and strategy. I've been that child. It's a very lonely way to live. Damon looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Nina asked me last night if you were okay. She asked about the baby. Something crossed Genevieve's face that she didn't try to control. She has good instincts, Damon said quietly. She has your instincts. He was quiet again. Then he said, if you tell the truth in court, all of it, it helps my custody case. You know that. Yes, that's not why I'm doing it. But yes, he nodded slowly. Then let's go inside. You can tell me everything I still don't know. What followed was not a dramatic reversal. It was work. Damon reached out to a former colleague named Davis who'd done electrical work in 3 of Sebastian's properties and had been let go without the payment he was owed. Davis knew 2 others. Between them, they had documentation, emails, voicemails, a pattern of a man who treated people below his tax bracket as disposable. None of it was explosive. All of it was real. Damon handed it to Genevieve's legal team, who knew what to do with real. Genevieve's attorneys filed a counter petition. Full timeline. Sebastian's approach. His threat. The reasoning behind the contract marriage. 42 pages. 3 additional declarations from women who'd encountered Sebastian's methods. Sebastian's attorney requested a delay. The judge declined. At the hearing, Sebastian sat across the courtroom in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He watched his petition dissolve in real time as Genevieve's attorney presented the case without drama. Only evidence. Boring and devastating in equal measure. The argument he'd constructed over months collapsed in 4 hours. His paternity claim was dismissed. His seat on the investment committee went under board inquiry. He did not go quietly, but he went. 3 days later, Damon sat in a different courtroom. The custody hearing. His attorney presented documentation. Stabilized housing. Legal representation. Evidence of consistent care across 6 years. Every appointment kept. Every school pickup made. The Prescott family's attorney made arguments in different language than before. More careful. The tabloid story had been withdrawn. Then Genevieve was called. She stated her name. Stated her relationship to Nina. A member of her household, she said. And hopefully a consistent presence in her life going forward. She testified about Damon's character, his conduct as a father, the stability of their home. Not warm in the performed way, just honest. The Prescott attorney asked if the marriage had been entered under genuine circumstances. Genevieve looked at him steadily. It began as a contractual arrangement, she said. It is no longer that. I would like the court to understand the distinction. Damon watched her say it. He hadn't asked her to. The judge asked if Damon had anything to add. He stood, looked at Nina in the gallery. I love my daughter, he said. I've loved her since the day she was born. I've made mistakes, and I'll make more. But there's nothing I wouldn't do for her. Nothing I wouldn't do to make sure she grows up knowing she's loved. That's all I have. He sat down. The judge ruled in his favor. Full residential custody. Outside the courtroom, Nina wrapped both arms around his waist and held on. He pressed his hand to the back of her head, closed his eyes, breathed. Genevieve stood slightly apart, hands clasped, expression composed in the particular way of someone who is not composed at all. Nina released Damon, turned to Genevieve, studied her with her usual seriousness. Is the baby going to come soon? About 8 weeks. Nina nodded gravely. I can help. I'm good at taking care of things. Something in Genevieve's face went very still. I know you are, she said. The baby came on a Wednesday at 4 o'clock in the morning. Damon drove Genevieve to the hospital, sat in the waiting room with Nina asleep across his lap, her head on his jacket, one hand curled under her cheek. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A television in the corner played something no one was watching. He didn't know exactly what he was to Genevieve, or what she was to him. The contract had dissolved in the legal filings. What existed between them now had no name and no clause and no termination date. He found he was not troubled by that. When the nurse came out and said he could come back, he carried Nina because she hadn't fully woken and he didn't want to put her down. Genevieve was in the bed with the baby against her chest. A girl, small and certain of her own presence in the room. Genevieve looked up, the unguarded expression. Nina stirred, looked at the baby with careful eyes. She's really small, Nina whispered. She'll get bigger. Does she have a name? Genevieve looked at the baby, then at Damon. I was thinking about that on the way here. I haven't decided. Nina considered this with great seriousness, looked at the baby for a long moment. She looks like an Eleanor. Genevieve tried it. Eleanor. The baby made a sound that resolved nothing and everything. Eleanor, Genevieve said again. Quieter, like a decision made. Damon sat in the chair beside the bed. Nina climbed carefully into his lap, folded her hands, looked at the baby with the attention of someone accepting responsibility. The room was quiet except for the sounds of a hospital at 4 o'clock in the morning. Distant, indifferent to what was happening here. What was happening here was not in any contract, not negotiated or planned, just become. Through small moments, no one records and everyone remembers. Damon looked at Genevieve. She looked back. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. This story began with an eviction notice and a contract. It ends with a name chosen by a 6-year-old at 4 o'clock in the morning. What Damon and Genevieve found wasn't in those 14 pages. It was built in quiet spaces, in a thermostat adjusted and reset, in a woman sitting on a floor because a child needed someone to stay, in a man who walked into a crowd for a stranger and never walked back out. The real things in life rarely come with terms and conditions. They just show up and ask you to choose. If this story moved you, if you believe that kindness is not weakness, and that real families are built by choice rather than contract, subscribe and follow this channel. There are more stories like this one. Stories about people who do the hard thing even when the hard thing costs them everything. Stay for those. They're worth it.